Welcome to the Labor Force Podcast, where we talk about the rise in labor militancy and the fact that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strukin, proud member of New York State United Teachers. Well, I've been saying it repeatedly lately, but there's a growing split in America right now between what the economic headlines say and what working people are actually living through. Politicians point to stock markets, GDP growth, and corporate earnings, but millions of workers are measuring the economy in a very different way, by whether they can afford groceries, rent, gas, childcare, and a future. And increasingly, the answer is no. The latest consumer sentiment numbers paint a bleak picture. Reuters reported that the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index fell to record lows in May, as inflation fears intensified and Americans became increasingly pessimistic about the future. Rising gas prices, food costs, and worries about long-term inflation are crushing confidence. At the same time, the AP found that roughly two-thirds of Americans are actively cutting back on spending, despite the stock market hovering near record highs. That contradiction tells you everything you need to know about the modern economy. Wall Street may be thriving, but working-class households are pulling back because their paychecks are no longer enough. Higher-income Americans tied to stocks and assets continue to gain wealth, while everyone else falls further behind. This is what economists increasingly call the K-shaped economy. And now we're seeing just how severe that divide has become. A new report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found what it described as a remarkable increase in food insecurity, particularly among lower-income households, families with young children, and workers without college degrees. Between late 2025 and early this year, more households reported skipping meals, struggling to find enough food, relying on savings for basic expenses, or seeking food assistance. The New York Fed also found a sharp decline in job-finding expectations among lower-income workers. Think about how staggering that is. We're constantly told the economy is strong, yet one of the country's own Federal Reserve banks is documenting rising hunger, rising pessimism, and growing desperation among ordinary Americans. And it's not hard to understand why. Food prices continue rising. Reuters recently reported that grocery inflation accelerated sharply in April, with major increases in beef, coffee, dairy, fruits, vegetables, and other staples. Gas prices remain painfully high, hitting lower-income workers especially hard because commuting costs eat up a much larger share of their budgets. Walmart, one of the clearest indicators of working-class consumer health in the country, is already warned that higher fuel costs are squeezing household budgets and can soon push prices even higher across stores. When Walmart starts sounding alarms about consumer stress, that's a warning sign for the entire economy. Meanwhile, the political response feels almost surreal. Reuters reported that Trump has repeatedly focused attention on plans for a lavish White House ballroom project, while often minimizing or sidestepping the economic pain Americans are experiencing. Even some Republicans reportedly worry the administration appears detached from everyday struggles, like rent, groceries, health care, and wages that no longer keep pace with the cost of living. And then there's housing, perhaps the clearest example of how unequal this economy has become. CBS News recently highlighted research showing that homeownership increasingly depends less on income and more on whether your parents already had wealth or owned property. In other words, the American dream is becoming hereditary. If your family already owns assets, you have a pathway into stability. If not, you're increasingly locked out no matter how hard you work. That reality is crushing younger workers in particular. For decades, Americans were promised that hard work, education, and persistence would lead to security. But younger generations are staring at skyrocketing rents, unaffordable home prices, crushing debt, and wages that simply do not keep pace with inflation. And here's the important part labor needs to understand. Workers are not irrational for feeling pessimistic. The economy is not experienced through spreadsheets or stock indexes. It's experienced at the grocery store checkout line, at the gas pump, when the rent is due, when a medical bill arrives, when parents skip meals so their kids can eat. That's why these reports matter so much. Consumer sentiment is not just bad vibes. It reflects material reality. If millions of Americans are cutting spending, losing faith in the future, skipping meals, and giving up on the possibility of home ownership, then the problem is not perception, the problem is the economy itself. Because an economy where wealth keeps concentrating upward while insecurity trends downward is not healthy, it's not sustainable. And for working people, it increasingly feels like the promises of economic stability have been replaced with permanent precarity. And let's say you just need to let loose once in a while. Go to a show or a concert and actually have a fun night. Well, if you've had any disposable income and tried to buy concert tickets lately, you might have had a surprising experience. You pull up the seating chart, expecting that familiar scramble for seats, and instead you're staring at row after row of availability. A whole map that looks calm, too calm. And in the ticketing world, that calm shows up as one color, blue. People in the music business have started calling this blue dot fever. The idea is simple. Those blue dots are unsold seats, and there are more of them than anyone expected. What's scary isn't just that a few shows are underperforming. It's that tours are getting scaled back and canceled before they ever get started. And that raises a bigger question. What happens to live music if artists can't afford to tour and fans can't afford to go? Everyone says they want live music to thrive, but wanting it and being able to sustain it are two very different things. To understand how we got here, we have to rewind a little bit to the years right after the pandemic. Venues reopened, and it felt like the whole world had been holding its breath. People were desperate to get out, to feel something with a crowd, to hear that first chord hit in a room full of strangers who all loved the same band. That spending surge even got a nickname, Funflation. Concert going jumped dramatically compared to pre-pandemic levels, and the entire live event economy ramped up to match it. Promoters booked bigger rooms, production became more ambitious. The assumption was that demand would keep climbing, or at least stay high enough to justify the scale. Then 2026 shows up, and the math stops working. Because the problem isn't that people suddenly hate concerts, it's that the financial reality for everyday fans changed. Costs rose across the board, and non-essential spending got harder to justify. When budgets tighten, a night out that includes tickets, transportation, maybe parking, maybe a babysitter, and definitely overpriced drinks starts to slide down the priority list. And this isn't limited to one genre either. It's not just rock bands trying to sell out arenas. We've seen pop artists make major adjustments too. Stadium plans get reduced, entire tours get pulled, even established names, artists that a few years ago would have felt like safe bets, are discovering that the crowd isn't automatically there at any price. And that phrase matters, at any price. Ticket prices kept rising even as the audience became more cautious. Stadium tickets that were already expensive somehow got more expensive year after year. It's easy to assume that higher ticket prices happen because artists are simply grabbing for more money, but the truth is messier. The face value of tickets is typically set by the artist team based on what they think the tour costs and what margin they need. Ticketing companies handle the processing and add fees, but they usually aren't the ones picking the base price. So when you see a stadium ticket pushing $200 or more, that's often an attempt to make a tour viable, not just a flex. The catch is that what's viable for the tour budget can be completely unrealistic for the average fan, especially when the economy shifts. And here's the part that a lot of listeners don't see. Even packed shows can fail financially. Touring is brutally expensive. A great example came from an indie band, Los Campesinos, who publicly broke down the finances of a North American run they did a couple years back. They played 11 shows and sold out almost all of them. From the outside, that sounds like a clear win. But when they added it up, the show fees brought in just under what the tour cost them. After expenses, hotels, flights, visas, crew pay, transportation, wear and tear on gear, daily costs, commissions, they were actually in the red on the ticket income. They made money in the end largely because they sold a lot of merchandise. That's the kind of detail that changes how you hear the phrase sold out. Sometimes it just means you lost less than you would have otherwise. Sometimes it just means you lost less than you would have otherwise. And another key point, many of those costs hit before the first ticket is even scanned. Bands often have to front huge amounts of money just to start rolling. If anything goes wrong, someone gets sick, a show is canceled, a van breaks down, gear goes missing, you don't just lose a little, you can lose the whole run. Scale that up to artists with massive productions and you can see why the stakes get extreme. Big tours can involve fleets of trucks, complex staging, large crews, and enormous nightly operating costs. When you're carrying that kind of overhead, a seating chart full of blue dots isn't just disappointing, it can erase the margin entirely. And blue dot fever doesn't exist in a vacuum. Live entertainment competes with live entertainment. Fans only have so much money and so much time. In 2026, there's also the FIFA World Cup landing in North America with a huge number of matches. That's a lot of events pulling attention, travel, hotel bookings, and disposable income in the same season. Interestingly, even the World Cup has seen reports of slower sales in some places because the same forces apply. Flights cost money, hotels cost money, and budgets aren't infinite. The pressure is affecting every corner of ticketed entertainment, and each sector unintentionally makes the other's job harder. Now there's a twist in the data. The very biggest artists are still doing well. At the top of the touring world, revenue and ticket sales can still grow because megastars are basically their own category. Fans plan around them. They save for them. They treat those shows like major life events. But the middle tier, the artists who can headline amphitheaters, arenas, and large theaters, those are the ones getting squeezed. For years, that level looked stable. Not superstar money, but a solid career. And that's exactly where Blue Dot Fever seems most dangerous, because it hits the part of the ecosystem that supports touring musicians, crews, and the future pipeline of artists. And if you're an up-and-coming act, the question becomes even harsher. Can you even afford to tour at all? The upside is that making and releasing music hasn't become impossible. Artists can record independently, and fans can still discover songs and build communities online. But live performance is where careers often grow, and it's also where a lot of musicians actually try to make their income work out. If touring collapses as a realistic option, the entire shape of the industry changes. So what's the cure? There isn't a magic fix, and hope doesn't balance a budget. The most realistic answer is also the least glamorous. Smaller venues, more realistic pricing, and tours designed for the world we're in now, not the world we were in during the post-pandemic boom. Of course, it's not always a simple choice. Contracts, routing, expectations, and the sheer logistics of changing venue sizes can get complicated fast. But the larger lesson is pretty clear. The industry scaled up based on a surge that couldn't last forever, and now it's dealing with the hangover. Planning has to account for how quickly conditions can turn. Because until something adjusts, prices, venue sizes, touring models, or all of the above, those blue dots will keep showing up. And for too many artists, a map full of empty seats doesn't just look bad. It can mean the tour never happens at all. And in this graduation season, of course, one of the great myths sold to young people in America is that if you just work hard, stay out of trouble, get good grades, and earn a college degree, the economy will reward you. But for the class of 2026, that promise is looking shakier by the day. A recent opinion piece from USA Today argues that today's graduates are walking into one of the most difficult entry-level job markets in years. Hiring has slowed, employers are cutting back on training programs, and AI is beginning to reshape white-collar work faster than universities can adapt. Meanwhile, students are graduating with massive debt loads into an economy where even good jobs increasingly require years of experience for supposedly entry-level positions. And honestly, if you listen closely to younger workers right now, the frustration sounds a lot like workers experienced after the Great Recession, or even earlier during the early 1990s downturn. That's what makes this recent article from the New York Times so interesting. It revisits graduates from the class of 1991, another generation that entered a weak labor market and felt completely adrift at the time. One woman, Jennifer Bognar, described spending her spring break in Washington, D.C., knocking on doors asking if anyone had a job opening. At the time, she admitted, "I just can't find anything out there." And her daughter Julia is facing almost the exact same problem after graduating from Arizona State with a graphic design degree. She says companies either reject her outright or never respond at all. What's frustrating, she said, is trying to convey that to companies. And that detail matters because it cuts against this lazy narrative you hear from pundits who want to blame young workers for everything. These graduates are applying, they're credentialed, they're trying. The jobs simply are not there in the numbers they were promised. Another graduate profiled in the piece, Sharon Dilling, ended up taking a secretarial job because journalism positions were disappearing during the recession. It wasn't what I wanted to do, she said, but she also offered advice that feels brutally relevant today. You don't have the luxury of sitting down and feeling sorry for yourself. You've got to keep going. Now, there's something both inspiring and deeply troubling about these stories. Inspiring because many people eventually found meaningful careers through unexpected paths. Troubling because society increasingly normalizes this idea the young worker should just absorb instability, underemployment, unpaid internships, and endless uncertainty as a rite of passage. And that instability is hitting especially hard in cities like Philadelphia. A recent report from the Philadelphia Inquirer highlights graduates struggling to break into professional work while relying heavily on networking, temp work, and personal connections just to get interviews. That's another uncomfortable truth about the modern labor market. Merit alone often isn't enough. Increasingly, access matters. Who you know matters. Whether your family can financially support you through months of unpaid or low-paid work matters. And that creates a class divide that isn't talked about enough. Because when graduates are told to just network, what that often really means is leverage social capital. But working class students frequently don't have relatives in corporate management, media, law firms, or finance. They don't have built-in pipelines. At the same time, entire professions are being reshaped in real time. Julia Bognar worries AI could undermine graphic design jobs, though she insists human creativity still matters. Quote, people are using AI and it's obvious, she said. What we bring to the table is something a little intangible. And she's right. But corporations don't necessarily prioritize quality or human creativity over labor cost reductions. If executives believe AI allows them to cut junior staff positions, many of them absolutely will. That's the broader issue here. We built an economy that treats young workers as disposable inputs instead of human beings trying to build stable lives. The old social contract has eroded. A degree no longer guarantees security. Productivity gains don't translate into stability for workers. Entry-level jobs vanish while corporate profits soar. And younger generations are being told to endlessly adapt to systems they had no role in creating. But there's another lesson buried in these stories too. Workers survive collectively, not individually. The answer cannot simply be hustle harder. We need stronger labor protections, public investment, affordable education, and a labor market that values people beyond their immediate profitability. Because if every graduating class keeps hearing the exact same message decade after decade, take whatever you can get, stay resilient, lower your expectations, then maybe the problem isn't the graduates. Despite our challenges, it's important to know that we're still good people at heart, right?
Now, an incredible story from Riviera Beach where a man made a remarkable decision. He found something extremely valuable in a Wawa convenience store restroom. Now, Ari Hutt explains why that man quickly ended up at police headquarters.
This is a story that makes you ask yourself, if you found something very valuable, how hard would you work to give it back? It's a question Luis Salazar no longer has to ask himself. This is police body cam video of Luis Salazar inside the Riviera Beach Police Department Thursday, but he's not here because he did something wrong. In fact, he's here because he did something very right.
If something doesn't belong to you, you didn't earn it. Give it back. Be kind.
Sunday afternoon, Salazar stopped at this Wawa in Riviera Beach to use the bathroom. Inside, on the safety railing, he found a fanny pack. He figured it belonged to the person who had just used the bathroom before him.
So I saw it, I grabbed it and tried to locate the person that was there.
But Salazar had no luck, so he opened the pack to look for identification. Instead, he saw cash, a lot of it.
My body was like numb, just seeing all this money that belonged to somebody else.
Meanwhile, the person who had left the fanny pack didn't realize it was gone until he got to Broward County. That person does not want us to identify him.
I was like, oh my God, my freaking money's gone. I'm out of all this bread. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Salazar says he spent days looking for the owner of the fanny pack. The fanny pack owner contacted the Riviera Beach police to report it missing. Using security video, police were able to identify and locate Salazar. And Thursday, they told him the pack owner was waiting for him at the police station.
So I gave him his bag. This is yours. And he was crying and he hugged me.
I was just thankful to get my money back, to be completely honest.
And that brings us back to the body cam video. The pack's owner counting his money and realizing every dollar was still there.
$30,023.
$30,023, cash he was carrying for a family emergency, cash he's shocked Salazar gave back.
I was pretty astonished that anybody would have done that. Think about it, that's life-changing money. People would kill for that kind of money.
But Salazar says it never occurred to him to keep it. His only goal was to return it.
It's not my money to take. I was not raised that way.
I guess maybe there's just more good people in the world than most people think, you know what I mean? You'll never know who you run into, and Luis is just one of those good people.
And the owner of that money told Luis he wants to thank him by taking him out to dinner. They're still working out the plans as to when that might happen. In Riviera Beach, Ari Hutt, WPBF 25 News.
Now, always and forever to the fight back. Some organizing news first, again from very different sectors. Uber and Lyft drivers in Massachusetts have officially unionized in what the Boston Globe described as the first-in-the-nation move, setting the stage for collective bargaining between rideshare drivers and the platforms they work for. The newly certified App Drivers Union said it will represent roughly 70,000 drivers across the state after receiving recognition from the Massachusetts Department of Labor Relations. According to the report, the union can now begin negotiating with companies like Uber and Lyft over wages, job security, and working conditions. The organizing effort follows a 2024 Massachusetts ballot initiative that created a legal pathway for rideshare drivers, who are classified as independent contractors rather than employees, to unionize. The App Drivers Union is backed by the SEIU's 32BJ chapter and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Organizers say drivers are seeking better pay, benefits, working conditions, while also fighting unfair deactivations and demanding a real voice in making important decisions that affect our jobs. The Globe noted that the unionization push comes as drivers face increasing uncertainty over automation and the future of app-based work, including the expansion of autonomous vehicle testing. Union leaders frame the certification as a historic breakthrough for gig workers nationally, saying drivers are now positioned to pursue the first-ever collective bargaining agreement in the U.S. rideshare industry. And workers at Dark Horse Comics have announced plans to unionize under the banner Dark Horse Workers United, seeking voluntary recognition from company leadership by June 3rd. Organizing with the CWA, the group says its goals include improving job security, wages, and benefits, increasing workplace transparency and equity, and gaining a seat at the table in decisions affecting employees. In a statement, the union wrote, quote, "We are the workers that make Dark Horse a home to the unique comics, creators, and creative principles known around the world." Workers also argue that despite Dark Horse's reputation for supporting creator rights, quote, "We are regularly undercompensated and discounted, despite our essential role in the publishing process." The union campaign comes amid significant upheaval at the publisher. In a social media post, Dark Horse Workers United stated, quote, "The looming uncertainty from recent layoffs, wage and hiring freezes, change in leadership power, emergence of AI, and return to office policies, despite their economic impact on employees, have fueled us to organize and collectively address our concerns." Workers emphasize they're seeking a democratic workplace and said the union is fighting for equitable pay, workplace democracy, and a continued commitment to creator-owned comics. The organizing effort follows months of turmoil for the company after the departure of founder Mike Richardson and the announced closure of Dark Horse's retail arm, Things from Another World. According to reports, 59 eligible employees signed the recognition letter sent to interim CEO Jay Comas, and if the company declines voluntary recognition, workers plan to petition the NLRB for an election. They have a petition going you can sign that I'll post in the description. Public reaction online has been overwhelmingly supportive, with readers and comics fans posting messages such as "Solidarity Forever" and "Comics needs more unions." Importantly, the union clarified that Dark Horse Workers United is not calling for a boycott of the publisher at this time. And in very possible upcoming strike action, nearly 1,000 members of the UAW at American Axle and Manufacturing in Three Rivers, Michigan, are preparing for a possible strike ahead of their May 31st contract deadline, rallying around the slogan, "No axles, no trucks." Workers say a walkout could severely disrupt production at GM because the plant supplies axles for GM trucks. The strike authorization passed with 98% support, reflecting deep frustration over years of concessions, low wages, and deteriorating working conditions. As electrician John Krause explained, workers are determined to fight for no concessions, no tiers, and increasing job security. Many workers say they're still struggling from concessions made during the 2008 financial crisis to keep the plant open. According to Krause, "We took the concessions. Some went as low as $14.50 an hour, while newer hires once started at just $10 an hour. Workers also lost their pensions, which were replaced with a weaker 401k style plan. And today, top pay is reportedly only about $22 an hour after years on the job." Employee Rosie Dodge criticized management culture at the plant, saying workers are treated like bodies rather than people through constant manpower moves. The dispute also centers on quality of life issues, including mandatory overtime and lack of paid sick leave. Dodge said one of the biggest concerns is that workers don't have sick days, despite Michigan's new earned sick time law. Online reactions from current and former workers echoed those complaints, with one Reddit commenter claiming, quote, 70-plus weeks for most of the year were required for much of the plant. Workers argue the company has continued expanding and rewarding executives while demanding sacrifices from employees who help keep the business alive during difficult years. Now to Union Busting 101. Out to Colorado, where the lockout of more than 1,700 union workers at Cargill's Fort Morgan beef processing plant is beginning to reverberate throughout the food supply chain, raising concerns about beef production, prices, and local economic impacts. The dispute began after workers represented by Teamsters Local 455 overwhelmingly rejected the company's contract offer, with union officials saying employees voted 90% against the contract. Shortly afterward, workers were barred from the facility. According to Union Secretary-Treasurer Dean Modeker, the minute we left the parking lot, they put up the barriers. They put out security, and they're refusing to allow us back at the facility, even though our members just want to work. The company, meanwhile, said it acted because continued uncertainty around a potential work stoppage creates challenges to operating safely, responsibly, and reliably, and has redirected cattle shipments to facilities in Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas to minimize disruption. Still, analysts warn that the shutdown removes a meaningful chunk of processing capacity at a time when the U.S. cattle supply is already near historic lows. Jennifer Martin of Colorado State University told the Colorado Sun, quote, any disruption and any impact on prices is going to take some time to see because of the way the industry is structured, which creates a bit of a buffer for many supply chain shocks. Workers say the fight is about far more than wages, citing safety, dignity, and working conditions inside the plant. Bathroom access reportedly became a major issue during negotiations, with allegations that some workers avoided requesting breaks out of fear of retaliation. The conflict has also drawn attention because Cargill recently announced AI-driven production monitoring technology designed to increase efficiency and track worker performance in real time. Critics argue the technology intensifies pressure on employees in an already demanding environment. And in an example of the pure snakes employers can be, employees at Wizards of the Coast received a letter from management ahead of a June 2nd unionization vote, warning that organizing with the CWA could leave workers with more, the same, or less than they have now. The company argued that your voice is strongest when it is heard directly, not through a third party, while stressing that unionization was a personal decision. The effort involves developers working on Magic the Gathering Arena, after Wizards and parent company Hasbro declined to voluntarily recognize the union by a May 1st deadline. The letter explained that if workers unionize, the CWA would represent employees in bargaining over wages, benefits, scheduling, and other terms and conditions of employment, but warned that outcomes are not predetermined and negotiations can be lengthy, 465 days on average. Management also stated that all the benefits and perks you currently enjoy would be on the bargaining table, meaning employees could end up with, again, more, the same, or less than you have now. If workers reject the union, the company said it would continue working directly with employees with a much greater degree of flexibility than a typically rigid union contract. Meanwhile, here in New York, lawmakers are poised to approve sweeping pension reforms that would allow many public school teachers to retire earlier, marking a major victory for unions that have spent years fighting changes made under the state's controversial Tier 6 retirement system. Under the agreement reached by Governor Kathy Hochul and legislative leaders, teachers with 30 years of service would be able to retire at 58 instead of 63, while employee contribution rates would also be reduced for many workers. Supporters argue the reforms are necessary to address recruitment and retention problems in public education and other public sector jobs, where workers have long complained that Tier 6 offers significantly worse benefits than earlier pension tiers. For example, in my case, I'm Tier 4, which allows me to retire at 55 with 30 years of service. So we were fighting for equity for those who just had the misfortune to be hired later. Labor unions celebrated the deal as a major organizing win after years of pressure campaigns and rallies across the state. New York State United Teachers President Melinda Person called the agreement proof that when workers organize and stay united, change is possible, adding, quote, "This is a victory for public workers across New York." Union leaders argued that the original Tier 6 system, enacted in 2012, pushed retirement too far out and forced newer workers to contribute more while receiving less generous benefits. Critics, however, warn the pension overhaul could create major financial burdens for local governments and taxpayers. The package is projected to cost roughly $557 million annually, with about $440 million falling on municipalities and school districts rather than the state itself. Fiscal watchdogs and conservative critics argue the changes could lead to higher property taxes, budget cuts, or deferred public projects. Some opponents also argue the reforms disproportionately benefit public sector workers at a time when many private sector employees lack guaranteed pensions altogether. The reforms represent one of the most significant reversals of the Cuomo-era Tier 6 pension system since it was created more than a decade ago. The legislation also restructures contribution rates and raises overtime limits used in pension calculations for police officers, firefighters, and other public employees. The changes underscore the growing political influence of organized labor in Albany as unions continue pushing for broader rollbacks of earlier pension restrictions. So critics treat these pension reforms as a pure cost, while ignoring the cost of failing to recruit and retain teachers. Schools across New York are already struggling to keep experienced educators, and forcing people to work until 63 only makes the profession less attractive. After 30 years in the classroom, retirement should be considered earned. Someone starting at 22, like I did, would still work until nearly 60 under the new rules, hardly an unreasonable standard. The reforms also benefit more than workers themselves. Stable schools, experienced teachers, and lower turnover strengthen communities in the broader economy. Constant recruitment, understaffing, and burnout carry major financial costs too. Better pensions help retain skilled educators and reduce those long-term expenses. And the argument that public workers should lose retirement security because many private sector workers already have lost theirs gets things backwards. The answer is not to lower standards for everyone, but to protect and expand retirement dignity wherever possible. And the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, CBTU, used this recent convention to argue that labor rights and civil rights are one fight, warning that attacks on unions, voting rights, diversity initiatives are all interconnected struggles facing working people. Speakers at the gathering described the labor movement as being under one of its most serious threats in decades, with AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler declaring, quote, "What we've seen this past year, the past few weeks alone, are the most heinous attacks in a generation on working people, and especially against black workers in this country." CBTU leaders stressed that black workers have historically been at the center of the country's most important labor and social justice battles, from the Memphis sanitation strike to anti-apartheid organizing drives and today's union drives. CBTU, founded in 1972, was created to bridge the labor and civil rights movements after many black unionists became frustrated with what they saw as the labor establishment's failure to fully confront racism and political attacks on black communities. Convention speakers emphasized that racial unity is our strength and argued that solidarity across racial and ethnic lines is essential to resisting authoritarian politics and corporate power. Quote, "Workers today are facing some of the worst conditions imaginable," CBTU President Reverend Terrence L. Melvin declared from the main stage. "The rising cost of living has priced many out of obtaining basic necessities. Healthcare has become unavailable for millions. The price of gas has bled many of our bank accounts. Yet somehow there is always enough money to enrich the richest few." Melvin then said the Trump administration is demolishing unions with the stroke of a pen and a deaf ear to the workers, a reference to executive orders that have shredded union contracts and canceled bargaining rights for more than 1 million public service workers. Quote, "Now is not the time to bend," he said. "Now is not the time to forget the obstacles we have hurdled and the victories we have achieved. Instead, we need to lean on those victories to help pave the way for new accomplishments." The piece also connects today's organizing to a long history of black labor activism in the U.S. People's World notes that black workers helped build some of the country's strongest industrial unions and repeatedly linked workplace struggles to broader fights for equality and democracy. Quote, "Labor education will get us out of the mess we're in," Melvin said. "We need a new plan. We're not going back to 2024 or 2020. We need a new plan that has the labor movement front and center of everything going on in this country. As long as we organize, educate, and reach workers where they are, we're still in the game." Now back to AI, jobs, and debt collection. Yes, you heard that right. We'll get to it. First, an effort toward enforcement and protection. Returning to New York, there's a growing debate over the impact of AI on employment unfolding, where lawmakers are pushing for new transparency measures as fears of mass job displacement intensify. A bill introduced by New York State Senator Michelle Hinchey would require companies with 50 or more employees to report how many jobs are being eliminated or replaced by AI each year. Supporters argue that the state urgently needs reliable data as automation increasingly threatens white-collar work in industries like finance, healthcare, education, and technology. The legislation comes amid warnings that AI could upend thousands of jobs across the state, particularly in regions with large concentrations of tech and professional workers. The concern is fueled by a recent report from New York City Comptroller Mark Levine, who warned that AI could trigger a radical transformation of New York's economy and potentially eliminate tens of thousands of jobs under some scenarios. Levine's report outlined several possible futures, ranging from moderate productivity growth to severe layoff and recession-like conditions. In one pessimistic scenario, New York City could lose more than 52,000 jobs in a single year. Levine argued that, quote, there is no city in America, and perhaps none on earth, more exposed to both the promise and peril of AI than New York City. The proposed legislation reflects growing anxiety nationwide over AI's impact on workers. Some estimates cited in the discussion suggested up to half of entry-level white-collar jobs could disappear within 5 years, while broader research indicates that AI systems may significantly alter or automate large portions of existing work. Labor advocates and unions backing the New York bill say policymakers cannot afford to wait until layoffs accelerate before responding. As Senator Hinchey argued, the state needs a way to start counting the impact now, so workers and communities are not left blindsided by rapid technological change. And Wired out with a fascinating piece this week. AI is taking over the most cursed job in the world. There's a mad dash to automate the world's most hated calls. Have an unpaid bill? You'll hear from an AI debt collector sometime soon. So picture this. Your phone rings on a warm afternoon, and the voice on the other end introduces itself with a friendly name. It sounds calm, polite, even eager to help. But within a few seconds, you realize you're not talking to a person at all. You're talking to software, and it's calling about money you supposedly owe. That's what happened to a guy I'll call Ben. He picked up a call from someone who introduced herself as Eve. Eve already knew his name, and she knew the exact amount she claimed he owed a former landlord, $260. Then she went straight to the point, asking if he wanted to settle the balance right now by card or bank transfer. Here's the twist. Ben says he already settled that debt months earlier through a collection agency. Eve didn't seem to have that update, so Ben did what a lot of people do when they suspect they're dealing with a bot. He tried to ask questions that would force the handoff to a human. Something technical, something a script can't handle, but Eve just kept going. So Ben got curious, and instead of immediately hanging up, he decided to test the boundaries. He tried to lure the bot into a bizarre bit of role play, basically to see how far it would follow him into the weeds. According to Ben, the AI awkwardly played along for a few minutes, and then suddenly the line switched over to a human agent at a call center. That human didn't comment on what the AI had been saying. They simply looked Ben up, checked the account, and cleared it up fast. His balance was zero. End of story, at least for Ben. But the bigger story is that this kind of call is becoming normal. Debt delinquency in the U.S. has been unsurprisingly rising as people try to keep up with higher prices and paychecks that don't stretch like they used to. And as more people fall behind, the businesses paid to chase those debts are looking for a way to contact more people more often with less labor. The obvious answer, at least in Silicon Valley logic, is automation. So now the calls, texts, emails, and letters that used to be handled by human collectors are increasingly delivered by AI agents. Not just robocalls either. These systems can hold the conversation, respond to questions, and keep their tone steady even when you get frustrated. They don't raise their voice, they don't get tired, they don't clock out at 5. Their advantage isn't empathy, it's scale and persistence. Some estimates suggest AI debt collection could become a multi-billion-dollar industry within the next decade. And if you think about the job being replaced, it's not hard to see why companies are eager. Call center work is already rough, but making call center workers spend all day pressuring strangers for money, that's a special kind of misery. Debt collection consistently ranks near the bottom for job satisfaction. And it's not just unpleasant for workers. People hate getting these calls. When the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau started taking debt collection complaints, it was flooded quickly. That tells you something about how combustible this whole space is. Which raises a provocative question. If there's any role people might actually be relieved to see automated, is it this one? And if so, what does an AI debt collector have to do to outperform one of the least liked human jobs on Earth? To understand what these systems can really do, the reporter behind this story tried to reach the specific company Ben mentioned, ProCollect. And what happened next is a little telling. Different humans at the company gave different answers. One suggested calling back. Another claimed the company doesn't use AI. Human resources suggested sending questions by email. Questions were sent. No clear response came back about who Eve was or where she came from. Meanwhile, Ben tried calling Eve again and asking basic questions. Who made you? How were you trained? The bot didn't provide a real answer. On training, it offered something vague and corporate sounding, like it used conversation patterns and account-related training. And when Ben asked to speak to a human, Eve said the office was closed. That's part of what makes this moment so slippery. Debt collection is such an obvious target for automation that Eve could be powered by any number of vendors. There are startups building what they describe as fully automated call centers, with AI agents that handle millions of debt-related calls a month. In some countries, major banks are already clients. In the last several years, multiple debt collection and debt settlement startups have come out of well-known startup pipelines. Some of them operate at astonishing scale. One company says its AI systems reach tens of millions of connected calls in a single month. Not attempts, connected conversations. And they're not just blasting the same script to everyone. These companies brag about how much the AI adapts. The pitch is that the agent changes its voice and wording depending on the situation and even the person it's calling. If the conversation is about hardship, the tone shifts. If it's a routine reminder, it becomes more casual than neighborly. In Spanish-speaking contexts, some systems even claim to adjust accent and phrasing based on the country they're calling. Then there's the question of escalation. When does the AI hand you off to a person? Some companies say their agents transfer the call if you mention things like bankruptcy, serious illness, or death in the family, signals that might require more care and also have more legal risk. Other systems may keep the AI on the line longer, and at least one startup demonstrates that agents can review details about the person they're calling and adjust based on cues like job loss, medical issues, or whether lawyers are involved. Some of these companies also talk about building what they call psychographic profiles using transcripts from previous conversations. In plain language, that means the AI tries to infer what kind of person you are and what approach might work for you. Now, if that makes your skin crawl, you're not alone. Debt collection has legal boundaries for a reason. In the U.S., the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act is supposed to prevent harassment and abuse, things like repeated late-night calls or threats to expose someone's debt to family members. Every AI startup in this space insists it designs for compliance. But compliance in theory and compliance in reality can be two different things. One concern is simple. AI systems can be buggy. If a bot mistakenly confirms the debt to the wrong person, that's not just awkward, it can be illegal. One credit counselor described the whole field as a legal minefield. And that's before you even get into questions like whether the AI is accurately representing the debt in the first place. Supporters of AI collectors argue this technology could actually be gentler than the old model. Their logic is that bots don't have bad days, don't get angry, and won't lash out. They present the AI as calm, consistent, and less judgmental. Some even claim the reception can be surprisingly warm. In a few cases, industry folks say people didn't want to stop talking. They describe situations where someone asked for a direct number to keep the conversation going, or where the caller seemed to develop a personal attachment to the voice. That's not a minor detail. It hints at something deeper. These systems aren't just trying to collect money. They're designed to be socially frictionless to keep you engaged. A lot of these agents use female voices, which isn't an accident. Companies will tell you bluntly that certain voices perform better. It's part of a broader pattern in consumer tech where assistants are given friendly names, polished personas, and sometimes even avatars with welcoming expressions. The goal is obvious: make the collector feel less like a collector. And because the branding is so generic, names like Emily, Lexi, Taylor, and yes, Eve, you can't even assume a name identifies a specific platform. One company literally has Eve in its name and builds debt collection voice bots. But even they point out that Eve is a common choice across the industry, and contracts can prevent anyone from confirming who's using what. To make things messier, when Ben called Eve again at one point, the bot reportedly glitched and introduced itself using Ben's name. That kind of error isn't just funny. It's a reminder that the friendly persona is a thin layer over an imperfect system. All this hype raises a basic question. Do AI collectors actually work? One researcher who studies AI debt collection argues they might be less effective on certain people because the social pressure is different. When you promise a human you'll pay, there's a sense of obligation, maybe even shame. When you promise software you'll pay, it can feel less binding, like you're negotiating with a machine instead of disappointing a person. But the startups flip that same point into a selling feature. They argue that the absence of judgment makes people more comfortable, less embarrassed, talking to an AI about financial trouble. And that idea matches broader research suggesting people can prefer chatbots for sensitive or awkward topics. Still, critics worry the technology makes a bad situation worse. If people already feel pressured by collection letters and calls, an AI system can turn that pressure into a flood. The industry used to be limited by human time, how many calls one collector can make in a shift. Now one automated agent can run thousands of conversations at once. Even if every single one is polite, the volume itself can become a form of coercion. Advocates working on consumer protection are pushing for rules that make companies directly responsible for what their AI collectors do. Because if a bot violates the law or misleads someone or escalates harassment through sheer persistence, the damage lands on the person picking up the phone. And here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. It's not just collectors using AI. People in debt are starting to use AI right back. One woman, using the name Mary, described owing a huge amount of money to multiple creditors after a difficult period running her business. She hired a debt settlement coach and a lawyer, but she also uses ChatGPT to help draft scripts for conversations so she doesn't get flustered. She doesn't think it's perfect, and she values her coach's guidance, but she's found the AI surprisingly useful, sometimes more useful than the lawyer for quick, practical wording. That's the direction we're heading. AI on both sides of the call. Some fintech products already offer AI debt advisors, and some promise voice agents that negotiate with creditors on your behalf. So it's not hard to imagine a near future where you don't answer an AI collector, because your own AI answers for you. Two synthetic voices negotiating a payment plan while the humans sit on the sidelines. Before wrapping up, Ben made a final attempt to get answers about Eve's origins, and this is almost poetic. He tried seeing whether the debt collection bot would reveal more to another AI than a human. He put ChatGPT on the line in voice mode and had it question Eve. The result wasn't a grand reveal. The bot stumbled, claimed it wasn't understanding, offered a transfer to a live agent, and then hung up. So where does that leave us? AI debt collectors are arriving fast because the economics make too much sense for companies to ignore. More outreach, lower labor costs, and always-on persistence. The tools are getting more sophisticated, more personalized, and more capable of shaping their tone to the moment. But the risks scale too. Mistakes, privacy problems, legal violations, and a level of pressure that could become relentless simply because it can. If you take anything away, let it be this. When you get a collection call that feels oddly smooth, oddly patient, and oddly tireless, you might not be talking to a person. And the most important thing you can do is slow down, verify what's being claimed, and remember that a conversational voice, human or synthetic, doesn't automatically mean the information is correct. Because in this new era, the most dreaded call in the world may not be made by someone having a miserable day at a call center. It may be made by a system that never has a day at all. All right. So if you're watching or listening, you identify with the travails of the working class. The hardships, stress, pressure of the hamster wheel, day in and day out. So let's change gears a little and try to see more of the bright side, if you will. I know I can do more of that myself. Think about the people in your life who seem almost magically upbeat. The glass half full types who take a hit, absorb it, and somehow keep moving. Meanwhile, plenty of us are over here replaying the worst case scenario on a loop. So here's the question. Are some people just born optimistic and the rest of us are out of luck? Or is optimism something you can learn the same way you learn any skill? Let's walk through an idea called practical optimism. It's a framework created by psychiatrist Dr. Sue Varma, and the whole point is that optimism doesn't have to mean denial, cheerleading, or pretending things are fine. Practical optimism is realistic, actionable, and designed to help you function better in everyday stress and also in major adversity. One of the most encouraging parts of this approach is the claim that only a slice of optimism is purely genetic. The rest is shaped by what you practice, how you interpret setbacks, how you regulate emotions, and what you do next. In other words, you're not stuck with whatever outlook you came with. You can build a better one. Dr. Varma developed this over years of clinical work, including work that began in one of the most intense environments imaginable, supporting people affected by the aftermath of 9/11, from first responders to civilians. And while she treated very real PTSD, depression, and anxiety, she also noticed something that surprised her. There were some people who had every reason to fall apart, yet they didn't develop the same level of severe symptoms. They still struggled, but something seemed to protect them. When she asked one survivor what her secret was, the answer wasn't some vague positive thinking slogan. It was purpose. This woman kept showing up, volunteered, helped other people to get appointments, advocated for resources. She had a reason to get out of bed, and she acted on it. That idea became the foundation for what Varma later described as 8 pillars of practical optimism. You can think of them as a roadmap, not for pretending life is easy, but for handling life as it actually is. And importantly, this isn't only for the huge life-altering events. The same mindset that can help someone cope with a big T trauma can also help you deal with what she calls the little T traumas, the everyday blows, the hassles, the breakups, the job stress, the uncertainty that builds up over time. So before we get into the how, let's be really clear about what practical optimism is not. It's not toxic positivity. It's not telling yourself everything is going to be fine when clearly it's not. It's not skipping grief, skipping anger, skipping fear, and slapping a motivational quote over it. Toxic positivity tends to sound like, don't worry, it'll all work out, or just look on the bright side, especially when someone's in pain. And when you're the one hurting, that kind of response can feel dismissive, like your experience is being waved away. Sometimes you don't need a silver lining. Sometimes you need to vent. Sometimes you need to be heard. Sometimes you need someone to sit with you in it. Practical optimism also isn't exactly the same as resilience, even though they're related. Resilience is often described as bouncing back after something bad happens. Practical optimism goes a step further. It's about learning how to thrive even when life is hard. Because bouncing back suggests returning to baseline, and for a lot of people, the baseline wasn't stable or healthy to begin with. Practical optimism is about building a sturdier foundation, not just returning to whatever you had before. At its core, practical optimism is a balanced way of thinking that leads to action. It means you look at the situation honestly, you weigh the pros and cons, you get realistic about the risks, and then you do something useful with what you know. This is where it helps to imagine 2 extremes. On one side, you got the extreme optimist who moves too fast and minimizes the problem. On the other side, you've got the extreme pessimist who gets stuck in fear and overthinking. Both can lead to inaction just for different reasons. Here's a simple example. You get blood work back and it shows borderline high cholesterol. The extreme optimist might shrug it off and ignore it, assuming it'll resolve itself. The extreme pessimist might avoid follow-up entirely because they're terrified of what they'll find out. Either way, nothing improves. Practical optimism is the middle path. You take the information in, you accept that it matters, and then you take concrete steps to address it. Another useful point in this framework is how pessimism tends to distort reality in 2 directions at once. It can make you overestimate how likely bad outcomes are, and at the same time underestimate your ability to cope if they happen. Practical optimism aims to correct both. It pushes you toward a more accurate risk assessment, and it strengthens the coping skills that help you handle whatever comes next. And there's research that supports why this matters. Studies have linked optimism with better cardiovascular outcomes. Other research suggests that more optimistic people have a lower risk of dementia compared to more pessimistic people, even when you account for other factors like exercise habits, smoking, depression, and chronic illness. There are also findings suggesting optimistic people tend to live longer on average and have better health-related behaviors overall. Now, those studies don't mean optimism is some magical shield, but they do suggest that how you think and what you do because of how you think can shape your health and your life in measurable ways. So how do you actually practice practical optimism? Varma organizes it into 8 pillars. I'm going to walk through each one in a way that's easy to follow, like an action plan you can revisit. Pillar 1 is purpose. Purpose can be big, like your long-term direction in life, but can also be small and immediate. What's my intention for today, for this meeting, for this conversation? What am I trying to bring into the next hour of my life? The key is being specific rather than vague. And purpose doesn't have to mean grinding toward achievements. It also includes joy and pleasure. It includes doing things that feel meaningful and alive, even if they're small. One interesting detail from this framework is that even brief movement, like a brisk 10-minute walk, can boost a sense of purpose, not because it solves your whole life, but because it changes your state and reminds you can act. Pillar 2 is processing emotions. This is where practical optimism gets very grounded. Instead of bypassing feelings, it gives you a structure for dealing with them. Varma describes this as a 4-step sequence. Name it, claim it, tame it, and reframe it. First, name it. What exactly is dragging you down? The more precise you can be, the better. Not just, I'm stressed, but I'm stressed because I'm afraid I won't meet the deadline, or I'm stressed because that conversation felt dismissive and I'm replaying it. Then claim it. Where does it show up in your body? Are your shoulders tight? Is your stomach in knots? Are you clenching your jaw? This step matters because emotions aren't only thoughts. They're physical experiences too, and noticing that helps you intervene sooner. Next, tame it. This is the regulation step. For one person, it's a 1-minute meditation. For someone else, it's journaling, deep breathing, or taking a short walk. The point is not to erase the emotion. The point is to bring it down to a level where you can think and choose your next move. And then reframe it if you can. Is there a perspective that's more helpful? Can you find a lesson, a next step, a partial upside? But here's an important nuance. Sometimes you can't. Not everything has a bright side, of course. When you can't find a positive spin, practical optimism offers a different question. Is this a problem to be solved or a truth to be accepted? That distinction can be incredibly freeing. Acceptance in this sense isn't surrender. It's acknowledging reality and recognizing the limits of what you can control in that moment. Pillar 3 is problem solving. This is where you blend intuition, logic, and emotional regulation, and then actually take action. It's the bridge between I understand what I feel, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Practical optimism keeps circling back to action, because action is what changes your life, not just insight. Pillar 4 is pride, and it's not about arrogance. It's about self-compassion and building steady self-worth. A lot of people feel unhappy not because they're doing nothing, but because they're constantly measuring themselves against impossible standards. Perfectionism and that running internal script of I should be farther along now can make life feel like a permanent failing grade. Self-compassion sounds soft, but is surprisingly practical. Research has shown that even brief self-compassion exercises can reduce shame and guilt enough to improve performance because you're less likely to freeze up. When you're not spending all your energy beating yourself up, you have more energy to focus and learn. Pillar 5 is proficiency. This pillar is about building confidence through skill and competence. Instead of waiting to feel confident and then trying, you try, build capability, and let real confidence grow from evidence. It's the difference between wishing you were good at something and putting in the reps that make you good at something. Pillar 6, presence. This is about clearing mental clutter and reclaiming attention. When your mind is constantly switching tabs, it's hard to feel optimistic because it's hard to feel anything fully except overwhelmed. Presence can look like mindfulness, single tasking, or simply creating boundaries around distractions so your brain can breathe again. Pillar 7 is people. Practical optimism is not a solo sport. It includes relationships, connection, and belonging. Not necessarily having a massive social circle, I certainly don't, but having real points of contact, people you can be honest with, people you can support, people who remind you you're not doing life alone. Pillar 8 is healthy habits, and Varma boils this down into the 4 M's of mental health: mindfulness, meaningful engagement, mastery, and movement. This is where the framework becomes very tangible. Mindfulness might be a short daily meditation or a few minutes of quiet breathing, or simply paying attention to your senses while you eat lunch. Meaningful engagement could be as simple as sending a genuine message to a friend, not a surface-level check-in, but something real. Mastery means investing in a hobby or skill that gets you into a flow state, where you feel absorbed and capable. And movement is exactly what it sounds like: consistent physical activity that supports your brain and body. A key idea here is consistency over intensity. 10 minutes a day can be non-negotiable, not because 10 minutes fixes everything, but because it reinforces the identity of someone who shows up for their well-being even when the day is chaotic. Alongside these pillars, Varma also recommends exercises that strengthen practical optimism. One is the best possible scenario visualization. And no, this isn't daydreaming with no follow-through. It's more like mentally rehearsing success, so you can clarify what you're aiming at and what it would take to get there. You picture the problem, you map out the path, and you imagine arriving at a solution. You get specific. What does success actually look like, and how would it feel? A lot of people never let themselves define that clearly, which makes it harder to take purposeful steps. Another tool is what she calls borrowed mastery. This is for moments when you feel like you're failing across the board. Borrowed mastery means you identify an area where you're competent or strong, and you let that evidence carry over into an area where you feel shaky. For example, someone going through a divorce might say, "I'm not good at fucking anything." But maybe they're a loyal friend, the person who shows up, the person others can rely on. That counts. That reflects integrity and capability. And recognizing it isn't cheesy, it's data. When you stop minimizing your strengths, you have something solid to stand on while you rebuild other parts of your life. And one of the most relatable parts of this concept is that even the person who created it says she has to practice it. Her mind, like many minds, naturally jumps toward worst-case scenarios. So practical optimism isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a practice, like yoga. Some days you do a little, some days maybe you do more. The point is you return to it. So if you're taking one thing away, let it be this. Practical optimism isn't pretending everything is okay. It's facing what's real, regulating what you feel, and choosing the next action anyway. And if that sounds simple, it's because it is simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. It means you can actually do it again and again until it starts to change your default settings. Pick one pillar to start with this coming week. Purpose, presence, people, movement. Any of them. Choose something small enough that you'll do it, and concrete enough that you know you did. That's how this mindset stops being an idea and starts becoming a skill. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and to my audio people, thanks for listening. Please like and share so I can get this message out to more of our brothers and sisters, and hit that subscribe button. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 shows and podcasts from around the country and around the world. You can check them all out at laborradionetwork.org. I'll see you next week. Solidarity, always.